WisconsinEye's Campaign 2024 programming is sponsored by Wisconsin Counties Association, Nicolet National Bank, Wisconsin Hospital Association, Operating Engineers Local 139, the Wisconsin Realtors Association, the Wisconsin Laborers District Council, and North Central State's Regional Council of Carpenters. To support programs like this, please consider a tax-deductible donation at wiseye.org/donate or by texting WisEye to 44321.
Representative Jerry O'Connor of Fond du Lac is the Republican candidate in the 60th Assembly District. The election is November 5th. Representative O'Connor, welcome to WisconsinEye.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, thanks for participating in our candidate interview. I'll start with asking you, what's your campaign's key message? Why are you running again for the Assembly?
Boy, that's an unfair question because there are several answers. I guess I would start fundamentals are finding common sense conservative solutions to today's issues. We have a lot of things that we are confronted with, from taxes to should we have refunds. We are dealing with the impact of inflation on every front, and quite frankly, it's really caused a lot of disruption in many areas. We need to find solutions to deal with that new criteria, that new setup. So those are things that I like to focus on.
So what's an example of a bill that you might prioritize introducing if you're reelected next session?
I would come back and target the bills related to tax refunds or reduction in tax brackets. Reasons why. You have to first step back and look at the big dark cloud over D.C. It's called the national debt. It is accumulating at the rate of $1 trillion every 100 days. It is absolutely not sustainable. Either the feds are going to have to figure out how to increase revenue, reduce expenses, and if you do nothing, then the Federal Reserve prints money, and that money ends up in increased inflation. And right now we are squeezing out middle and lower income tax groups, and I think we need to fight to make certain that doesn't take place in Wisconsin. But I think that also says for Wisconsin, let's make certain we have our house in order. Let's make certain we're not overtaxing, we're managing our budget, and we're finding cost-effective ways to provide the goods and services we expect from state government.
If you're reelected, you're coming back in a biennial budget year. The state's projected to have a $3 billion surplus. You mentioned tax cuts. Would that be one of the priorities for use of the surplus funds?
Yes, it would, and a couple of ways I look at that. I was part of being a co-author on some of our tax bills here in the last session that were vetoed, unfortunately. But if you take the 22 states in the middle of the country, North Dakota to Michigan and south of the Gulf, of those states, you look at their and compare their tax brackets, the first thing I have to do is boot Minnesota out of the picture. They are just crazy high with their tax brackets. But let's work on the 21 states. If you take Wisconsin's first tax bracket, or its highest tax bracket, followed by the middle income tax bracket, which is number 2, and you rank that amongst the other 21 states, we have the highest tax bracket and the 4th highest tax bracket throughout the entire Midwest. That doesn't make sense.
So you want to flatten that tax?
We need to flatten that down. And the other thing, we are losing senior citizens for 183 years or days out of the year to states where we have to compete against lower tax rates and sunshine. That's not working in our favor. I think we need to look at cutting taxes for retirees on their investment income and retirement incomes.
So you're talking about tax cuts, tax reform as part of the surplus use. You don't mention spending. Are there any areas for investment?
We will find areas for investment. I think what concerns me, I'm a banker, we really started out our budget process locking everything in place and not re-examining. Does this work? Is it effective? Is it cost effective? Good example. We have our unemployment support functions in a variety of ways. So I asked the Ledge Council to find out for me how many unemployment buckets of money do we have. And they came back and said, we haven't finished counting, but there are 47 of them. Well, do they talk to each other? Are some more cost effective than others? Should we be combining services? Should we look at coming up with a better plan? We're not doing that.
Some people think K-12 education should be a priority for investment. What is your campaign's priority in K-12 education?
K-12, my fundamental position on that starts out with, what's the purpose or the goal of K-12? It should be to prepare young men and women to graduate from high school and be ready to enter a workforce which is all out there waiting to say hello to us when we are 18 to 22 years old, and we're not getting that job done. I think we need to adjust our focus. We lost ground over COVID with kids being at home. That didn't work. I think a lot of people knew that wouldn't work, to leave my kid sitting in front of a computer. But we come back, we need to focus on our purpose in education. Number one is meritocracy. It's creating the best environment and opportunity for kids to learn and be prepared for adulthood.
What about higher education? What does the future of four-year colleges, two-year colleges, technical colleges look like to you, and what should the legislature focus on?
I'll go backwards. I'll start with tech schools. Tech schools have been growing and improving because in the trades industry, where there are shortages almost across the board, the earning and income opportunity is significant. Gosh, you could find out you're doing the same thing your dad or your granddad did throughout life. So I think that part is doing well. Two-year schools are faced with declining enrollment, and the reasons for that really affect all of the higher education, and that is we have declining enrollments in many of our schools. Certainly in the two-year schools, that has been more dramatic. The cost of education is discouraging many families from pursuing this degree. We need to look at the demographics here in Wisconsin, and we can learn that in kindergarten.
Does the Universities of Wisconsin system need more funding that they're requesting?
Their request to me is ridiculous. We need to, before we throw money at this, we need to step back and say, how do we right-size this organization? So I'm from Fond du Lac. The two-year campus is being closed. It's governed by the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh. But another thing Oshkosh did is they have 4 different colleges, and they reduced it to 3. So they right-sized their offering to match their resources. So to that extent, I think we need to be doing that throughout the system. We can't have all of our 13 campuses offering anything and everything. It just isn't cost justified.
What do you see as the state's largest workforce development challenge, and how should it be addressed?
Well, we're in the range of near full employment. So what we have, number of the unemployed, when I talk to employers, say, what's the status of new hires? Well, I have a business where we use metrics. So I brought a kid in and I said, multiple kids, show me where 6 7/8 is on this 12-inch ruler. And they can't answer the question. Or I make them a job offer contingent upon a drug test, and they can't pass the drug test. I think we've got to get down to some fundamentals, because we don't want to leave that group of people behind. They all have the capacity to be contributors to our society, so I think we need to focus on that group. Separate of that, it goes back to education. Are we providing the best product out of our education system to transfer over into the workplace today?
Investments in public and energy infrastructure grow our state's economy. These investments also provide an opportunity to invest in our state's workforce. But currently, there are no requirements for hiring local workers. Would you support a state resident hiring requirement for state, local, and utility scale infrastructure investments?
My best answer is yes and no. It depends on the industry. It depends on the skill set. When you get into a lot of these high-tech kind of infrastructure systems, it takes a huge capital investment Not everyone's able to put that together. So to fund a Wisconsin-only organization that doesn't have the capacity to compete on a national scale, we may be handicapping ourselves unnecessarily. On the other hand, if we have projects in front of us where we have the resources right here in Wisconsin, I think we should encourage them to bid best and get that job.
Employee classification is an issue in the construction industry. Some employers misclassify workers as independent contractors or pay them in cash off the books. This lowers costs by avoiding payroll taxes and unemployment insurance, and it puts compliant companies at a disadvantage when bidding on projects. Plus, misclassified workers may be denied minimum wage protections or overtime pay. Are you aware of this issue, and what do you think should be done about it?
Yeah, in my role as community banker, it's an issue that we faced, or at least I had discussions with. And that both was from the side of contractors saying, this is frustrating because XYZ company is lowering their costs by designating someone as an independent contractor. When you look at what they do, the independent contractor is performing the same services as an employee. Unfair playing field, all I care for is a level playing field. Then I talk to the individuals that are being, I'm going to say, misused with the misclassification. They don't have hospital insurance. They don't have vacation time. They don't have other benefits that an employee would normally get. It's just too much stress, and it's not a proper use of the system to take advantage of that.
Housing. Affordable rental housing is an issue in Wisconsin, and some have proposed government-imposed rent control to maintain affordability, while others argue keeping rent artificially low will decrease rental supply, resulting in increased prices. What is your sense of housing as an issue, and which best addresses rental housing affordability, rent control or building more rentals?
I would start, we need to understand the source of our housing problem in Wisconsin and nationally. It really comes from the fact, to a large extent, we have a lot of homeowners that are now, they're looking towards retirement, and they've got an interest rate locked in at 2.8%. They're not moving to go out and tackle a 6.75, and the cost of the house could in some cases double. So what that does is that stymies first-time home buyers to look at first and second level homes that you typically be able to buy at a reasonable price. If you back up within the last several years as a mortgage lender, maybe you needed $60,000 combined income to get into that starter home. It's now estimated to be $110,000 because, quite frankly, the starter homes are up at ridiculous prices for what you're buying. They probably come with a lot of maintenance issues. So as a result of that, if you can't move apartment dwellers into homes, then they end up in an apartment rent cycle.
Yeah, what's the solution for the high rents?
I would agree with the comment that price controls won't work because investors will simply redeploy their monies elsewhere.
Is there a role for the legislature incentivizing building more rental units?
We did tackle that in this current session. It provided for a variety of things. Considering the cost of new housing, I think we have to back up and look at one of the bills that was passed is providing money in downtown business districts where you might have a second level building that's sitting empty. We pay for costs to reconfigure that building at a low interest rate cost to the landlord, creating more housing. To a certain extent, you've got to try to find the right cost-effective balance if you start funding the building of the entire project. And I also have to question if that's the role of government. So, big challenge.
Big challenge. Moving on to healthcare, medical systems are facing numerous headwinds in the form of inflation, workforce development, and issues around Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement, resulting in fewer services and even the closure of a hospital system in western Wisconsin. What would you do to preserve access to care and prevent future closures?
This is a big challenge because between the cost of healthcare and the insurance to back it up, we're looking at astronomical numbers for many people today. So you have a hospital in northwestern Wisconsin, primarily serves couple of metropolis areas, but more than that, it's rural areas. The cost of today's technology is just through the roof. And the question is, can small rural medical providers compete on an equal plane? So more often than not, you get into these communities, that's where you find Medicare and Medicaid to be an important piece of the funding mechanism. So what do you do?
Raise Medicaid rates?
That's a possibility, but it's more than that. Right now, at the national level, the highest cost budget item is Medicare and Medicaid. It exceeds Social Security. It's number one out there. That's $1.8 trillion, or $3.8 trillion, and then if you look at what's unfunded for future Medicare and Medicaid, it's $43 trillion. We have a big problem.
You think this is a federal problem?
I think it starts as a federal problem, and we're going to have to step back and make some hard decisions. You go back to what's happening to the private sector, individual income earners. They're faced with inflation across the board. Inflation is increasing higher than their pay. Can we keep all the promises we've made? And what happens? I'm not much of a politician. I have less than 2 years into this. I'll tell you what, we have to back up and quit making promises that you pass on to the next generation of leaders. And all we have done is allow that problem to get bigger. We have to stop that.
Mental health care is another concern for Wisconsinites and for state and county budgets. What are you hearing on this issue in your district, and how would you propose addressing mental health care?
Well, I would say it was one of the loudest issues we heard in this past session. But the thing that strikes me is, how did we get to this point that we have this level of mental health, that we have this level of childhood sicknesses and illnesses that weren't here 30, 40 years ago? So there are things we need to do for the present to try to address the need. That will take some funding, it will take some training. But secondarily, we better figure out how to reverse the course of mental health increases, because we won't be able to afford it in the end.
What's your position on how Wisconsin should move forward on the issue of abortion?
That's just a fun question.
Have to ask it.
So where we find ourselves right now is somewhere between the First Amendment to the Wisconsin Constitution, the 1849 abortion law, and the 2011 law that allows for abortion up to 20 weeks. Now, obviously, most of the public's aware this has been pursued through lawsuits, and so our state Supreme Court is wrestling with, is the 1849 law constitutional, and can we find a way to make abortion constitutional?
Do you support the 1849 law policy?
Pardon? Fundamentally, I support it, but I'd look at the exceptions for life of mother and child.
Transportation. What are the pressing transportation needs in your district, and how important is it that these needs are addressed, and for the state to keep on schedule with the reconstruction of aging interstates and significant corridors of commerce?
Yes.
Roads.
It's
support
roads.
Okay.
That is our biggest issue. And
is that a priority in the next biennial budget, funding for roads?
It's going to be there for a long time. I have a friend in Iowa, he owns a gravel pit. And he says, you guys in Wisconsin are crazy. You built all of these asphalt roads everywhere on every little town, village, highway, and the cost of maintaining asphalt is huge. He said, if we have a washout over here in Iowa, not a problem. We just drop in another bucket load of gravel. We have a high cost problem, and it will not go away.
What's the solution?
Fund it a little bit at a time to get done what you need to do. Take care of your priorities.
PFAS and other water contaminants are a concern for a growing number of Wisconsinites. Do you see this as an important issue, and how do you propose addressing it?
Well, PFAS is going to require funding. This is a long-term, it was a long time coming kind of problem, and it will take quite a period of time to fix it. PFAS and other contaminants, and I won't confine it just to water quality. If we look at the kinds of chemicals that are in our food supply today, I go back to mental health. What's going on here? Chemicals designed to kill things that we consume, hey, there might be an issue that we ought to take a look at here.
Does there need to be more accountability for polluters with PFAS?
Yes. And right now, the challenge between the governor's office and joint finance is let's make certain we're targeting the right people and not the people that are in between the source of contamination and wherever it might end up.
We are to the last two questions. How would you describe the leading differences between you and your opponent?
My opponent is Joe Lavrance. I faced him in the last election. I went out actually as a result of this question to say, okay, where's he at? He has not updated his website, and he has not answered any independent survey questions. From my last experience with him, he's going to be a far left leaning candidate. I'll let him answer his own questions beyond that. In my case, I came into the position with significant levels of business experience, banking experience, funding charitable organizations, serving on a variety of boards. I think it's important to bring in a broad range of experience, and not just that I was an aide in somebody's office. Separate of that, I was able to get bills passed through the legislature and had 17 bills signed by the governor. So it was a good first term. They covered a broad range of issues. So I think it's just a matter that I'm able to get things done, not because I have a big ego or I'm smarter than anybody else, but I have learned some things along the way to find win-win situations.
Final question for you. If you're reelected and you have a magic wand you can wave in the state capitol to have just one issue resolved in a way that brings everyone together, what is that issue?
That's a good question. It's harder to answer to bring it down to what would you do with your wand. It would be a matter that people would realize why they're here, why they're created. What's your purpose or your purposes? Because there'll probably be multiple. And that we find common ground with one another and we live a life that we can pass on to the next generation that will have long-term sustainability attached to it.
All right, thank you, Jerry O'Connor from Fond du Lac, the Republican candidate in the 60th Assembly District. The election is November 5th. Representative Jerry O'Connor, thank you for talking with WisconsinEye.
Thank you.
This programming is brought to you by our generous sponsors. Thank you for watching.